All right, so that's the code that creates those coordinates. So now I need to actually draw it. What I'm going to actually do is I'm actually going to create the draw event in the basic wall. So if you look at the PDF, this D3D draw wall actually is going to go in the draw event of wall basic. So if I go into wall basic, add a draw event, and it's going to use x1, y1, z1. So drawing walls requires the first three coordinates, which is 1 point. Then x2, y2, and z2 is the second point, and it basically draws a plane between those 2 points. This is the texture, and then this is how often to repeat the texture. So once in the horizontal direction, once in the vertical direction, since we just want it to basically spread across the entire surface. So just a quick reminder, since this one, horizontal, is a child of wall basic, and horizontal doesn't have a draw event, it automatically gets its parent's draw event. So in reality, horizontal is actually going to have a draw event from the basic wall as well. So I'm going to get to the vertical wall in just a moment, but I want to actually get the camera up and running so we have something more interesting to look at. All right, this is probably the most important set of code here, is the projection code. This is what actually sets the camera up. This is going to go into the draw event of the player object. So the player is going to be the one that actually draws the camera. Because in a way, the player is the camera, right? We're actually looking out of the player's perspective. So this stuff here is going to go into player's draw event. Oy vey, what is all this stuff? Okay. So projection. The projection is basically the camera. So we're setting it up to be projection mode, which means it's a three-dimensional view. This is as opposed to orthographic view, which is the flat two-dimensional view that we see in 2D games. So with the projection, all the points merge in the horizon. So you know how things far away look smaller than things closer to you? That's what a projection is. The things that we have here are, so this is actually all one line. So it has x, y, and z here. So we're going to set up our camera's starting point to be the x and y position of my player, wherever he is. He's centered. And 10 pixels up. So my camera's going to be 10 pixels above the floor. The point he's looking to is this x, this y, and this z. So for those of you that remember your trigonometry, what this is doing is it's taking the direction, which is the direction that's built into player, and it's figuring out basically the adjacent side and adding that to your x position. So cosine is the adjacent, if you remember SOHCAHTOA. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. We're assuming the hypotenuse is 1 here. We're adding that to our x position. Sine would be y, because that's the opposite side of a triangle. And because GameMaker's y-axis is flipped, we're doing the minus to that. Now what's this pi over 180 thing? Well, direction is in degrees. And it turns out that cosine and sine require radians. So we have to switch degrees to radians, which is you do by multiplying by pi over 180. Lots of math for you. So this is actually the point where the camera is looking. Basically, imagine 1 pixel away, the x, y, and z of where your camera is looking. And it's looking 10 pixels above the floor as well. These last 3 points are in x, y, and z as well, and that's which direction is up. So you could have a camera that actually rotates around, if you imagine a ship rocking back and forth. For now, we're going to assume that z is up, because I don't want to get seasickness in this. So that sets up the camera. That's the direction the camera is going to point. Next up, we have what transparency should we use? So by default, everything is going to be totally opaque, so you can't see through it. That's an alpha value of 1. So alpha in most spriting and colors is how transparent something is. So alpha of 0 would be totally transparent. You could see right through it. You couldn't actually see anything. If it was halfway through, you could halfway see through it. So 0.5 would be halfway through. All right, draw set color. What that does is it sets the color of the camera. By default, it's white. If you wanted everything to have a bluish tinge, you could set the color to be blue, for example, or purple, or whatever. All right, the player is drawing the floor and the ceiling. So if you want to know where the floor and ceiling code is, that's right here. So it turns out that the floor and the ceiling are both actually just floors. It's just one is higher than the other. So the floor itself, we're going to start at 0, 0, 0, which is the upper left of the room. And my room by default is 640 by 480. So we're going to draw this square from 640 to 480, 0. So it's basically drawing a giant square from the upper left of the room to the lower right of the room. It's using this texture, the floor texture I put in, and it's going to repeat it 24 times horizontally and 18 times vertically. If you wanted it to repeat more often or less often, you could change those two numbers. And then we're drawing the ceiling, which is exactly the same code. It's just, notice it's 32 above us. And it's drawing the ceiling. Wow, that's a lot of code. So one more thing I didn't do yet is putting in the horizontal walls, or the vertical walls, I mean. So I'm going to pull the horizontal in. I'm going to copy that for the vertical and change it so it matches this one. So when this guy is created, instead of adding and subtracting from x, he's going to add and subtract from y to make walls up and down instead of left to right. Wow, that's drastically different than what we just saw. All right, now there's a few things that are a little funny here. I have my infinitely thin walls, because if you look down the side, it's basically a vertical line. Other things, so running into walls is a little funky. Like if you try and run into a wall at a slight angle, you just stop, always, which is kind of a pain. So the next thing we'll do in a few minutes is start dealing with making the movement smoother.